Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Solaris, Product Marketing Manager at Varicent, and I'm excited to welcome you to this conversation series that discusses how the use of artificial intelligence, or AI, can help organizations improve their revenue growth potential. So today I'm joined by two leading experts in the field of AI. We got Martin Fleming, research economist at the MIT-IBM Watson AI lab, author, fellow at the University of Manchester, and the chief revenue scientist at Varicent. And we also have Joel Shapiro, professor at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University and chief analytics officer at Varicent. So in this first video, we're going to discuss the relationship between artificial intelligence and sales performance management. And as we all know, today's ever-changing economic landscape, sales leaders are constantly looking for that competitive edge. How can they help sellers be more productive? How do they drive greater sales attainment? And ultimately, how to outperform their revenue goals? So AI is an obvious answer. I mean, it's everywhere, fueled in no small part by generative AI solutions like ChatGPT, which is poised to transform countless industries. And the question really, and I'll start with you, Martin, does AI have the potential to transform sales performance management processes?
Well, it sure does, Jason. And to understand the potential, it's really useful to understand that there are different types of artificial intelligence. As some of our viewers might know, there's a long history of machine learning and artificial intelligence that goes back for decades. But because of the most recent increase in the power of computing and software, we've really found very significant applications in this space. And while we're all familiar, perhaps, with generative AI, we can if anybody who's viewing our video hasn't gotten on to ChatGPT, they can get on for free and try it and enter a prompt and get an answer back. And that's really what we would call a large language model. It's all around the use of language. There's also another very large and prominent category of artificial intelligence, which is around computer vision. So think about, for example, the exacting standards that manufacturers of medical products have. Think of a cardiovascular stent. Need to be able to achieve 99.9% accuracy and perfection in the production of that stent because it's going into human bodies. That's a great example of where computer vision is quite important. But thirdly, the third category, which is going to become important in the story that we're going to tell, is what we're going to call predictive AI, the ability of artificial intelligence models to predict sales, maybe for supply chain purposes, or maybe for the purpose of setting sales quotas. We're all familiar with predictive AI because we know from our own experience, we can get on Netflix, and Netflix is predicting what videos we might like to watch. Or when we type a text, our phone is predicting what word we're trying to type. So predictive AI is important, and it's going to play a big role here, along with generative AI, in what we'll talk about from a sales performance management perspective.
And if I can sort of jump in, if I can add on to that, I think one of the most important things when people hear about the different kinds of AI, and I'm all in on what Martin just said in terms of those three different kinds, one of the most important things is you got to start by knowing what problem you're trying to solve or what question you're trying to answer. And this becomes one of the real keys to using AI in a smart way. So as Martin talked about, if you're like in the medical industry, imagine that you're like an oncologist and you're trying to diagnose early stage precancerous cells or tumors, having pictures, which you can look at and have machines analyze sort of different pixels on screen and so forth. It's a great tool for it. On the other hand, I don't really see immediate applicability of computer vision to help like with setting the right quota, for instance. That would be all about like a predictive AI. And we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but it's just incredibly important for everybody to recognize that the right AI tool is entirely dependent on the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that answers, a lot of people have probably a misconception maybe of what AI is. So I think it's important, the way you pointed out, both of you, the different types of AI. And it sounds like we're going to focus a bit more on generative AI and predictive AI for this discussion. So if we think about what you said there, Joel, about how it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. So if we kind of take a broad look here and think about what sales leaders are really trying to do, they're trying to increase productivity. Now, which type of AI would fit into that type of challenge or problem?
Well, I mean, I think in that case, you could use generative AI. There are lots of tools where you could help increase productivity. I could absolutely see that some sort of prediction, which tells you what's likely to happen. If you can flag individuals who are less likely to be productive, you could intervene in that way. So as with a lot of these things, I could see multiple opportunities for the different tools.
So let's focus a bit on generative AI, because I think that's the one that is on the top of everyone's mind. So Martin, could you give us an idea of what are some of the different uses, if we look from a sales performance management lens of where generative AI could be useful?
Well, the first point to understand is we're talking about language models, and these are actually quite large language models. And I like to point out and be able to communicate the notion that large language models are not large calculators. They're dealing with text and other sorts of unstructured data. And oh, by the way, if you enter in your sales force and their quotas or their territories and their quotas, there's some risk of it becoming public information. So we need to use generative AI to help us do a number of things. We can perhaps get a draft of an email or emails. We can perhaps get the summarization of a document. And there are software tools that are becoming available that will do that very rapidly. There are question and answer opportunities where generative AI is being applied, where perhaps whether it's a chat session or when we call a call center, questions are entered and we get answers. And the challenge for the model is to create precise answers. So there are a number of applications in the generative AI space where sellers can improve the effectiveness of their communication, improve their efficiency of managing their time and their meetings, and be able to, as a result, communicate among themselves, among colleagues, with managers, and communicate with clients as well. So it helps to improve efficiency, and it helps to improve communication. But it doesn't do calculating. So we have to make that distinction clear.
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction to make. So thinking about generative AI and a lot of the use cases examples you gave were around productivity improvements. How do you help sellers and other revenue generating folks do things faster? So I really like those examples. But you did mention, you highlighted one of the risks potentially of generative AI, and I think that's important to touch on. Joel, would you mind elaborating on that? Some of the potential risks around generative AI today.
Sure. So look, I think it's an amazing tool. It's an incredible tool, but I think the distinction between language and calculator is a really good one. But if you want to get some good feedback, advice, counsel, effective emails, whatever it is, if you want that about your company, the machine needs to know something about your company. And as Martin said, you could, if you want, you could feed the machine tons of information, your strategic plans, your sales history, your sales plans, all of your, every document that you have that relates to your business, you could feed it into it, because the machine, the more it knows about you, presumably the better the language that it returns to you will be. But man, that just makes me nervous even saying it. I mean, you've got a couple of problems. One, it's possible that exact information will make its way to somebody else. Like you load a sales planning document and somebody else might see it. But even if it's not that explicit, you don't want your most sensitive information being used as a foundation to help answer other people's questions. So that's one of the big vulnerabilities right now, is that the privacy and security concerns that I don't feel great about. But the other thing is that sometimes generative AI is wrong. And a lot of people have heard of this notion of hallucinations, but I think it's a little different than just hallucinations. The problem isn't that Gen AI is sometimes wrong. The problem is we don't always know when it's wrong. So when I use it, so I use generative AI all the time when I'm coding. I have a big data set. I'm a decent coder. When I need help, I turn to a generative AI like a chat GPT to help me code. Sometimes I ask it for help and I type in the code and I get a big error message. And then I go back to the tool and I'm like, hey, this didn't work. Here's the error message. And then it gives me a return answer. And maybe 1 out of every 10 times it fails and I get an error message. That's no big deal because I know it's wrong. I can re-ask the question. And then if it's wrong again, I can re-ask the question. And overall, it works really well for me. The problem is in most cases, there's no flashing error message. There's no obvious warning. And so when we get information, when we get answers that sound good, how do we know if it's actually meaningful, if it's real, if it's right? Sometimes our judgment can allow us to see things and be like, wait a second, is that quite right? But sometimes not. And again, I just want to say, it's like we all know that sometimes Gen AI is wrong. The problem is that we don't always know when it's wrong. And that is a really risky way of making high stakes business decisions. So I see that as the second important caveat.
So Jason, one of the work efforts that we're launching at the MIT lab is to do on a quite broad scale what the experiment that Joel is conducting personally in the accuracy of his Python code. He's come up with a 10% error rate. Well, we want to be able to test that across probably something on the order of 8,000 tasks that workers perform across various occupations. And it's a quite elaborate process that we're going through to survey workers and have them respond to what the models are producing. So this notion of accuracy is an important one. We have relatively little data. Joel's conducted his own experiment, but others are still in a much more preliminary stage. So that work is coming. And when we get it, we'll certainly be in a position to share it with our viewers. It will be, I'm sure, several months from now. The other point I would make is that the reason why Joel is so cautious, and I join him as well in the cautiousness of entering what would appear to be confidential business information into Gen AI models, is these large models. Think of OpenAI, the company, ChatGPT, and the versions of their models. They have scraped every website in existence. That's quite literally true. So consequently, they've run out of data. And they want us to enter our own data so that they can improve the accuracy of their models, which ties back to the first point that we're making. So there's a reason why you want to be cautious about entering data. It's because these models are dying for new sources of data. And that's one of the reasons why there's risk associated there.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating stuff. And I think if I could summarize what I've heard, and I think this makes a lot of sense. I mean, generative AI definitely has some uses within the sales performance management landscape today. And I think you called them out, Martin, some ideas around summarization, things that take a long time for people today, some increases in productivity. But as Joel, you pointed out, there's certainly not something you can make decisions at face value on, certainly not yet today. There's still a little bit of work to be done. But let's transition a little bit and talk about the other type of AI, Martin, that you called out, called the predictive AI. Let's transition and talk about that, because it sounds like a lot of what generative AI can do is around language, but let's focus a bit more around, as you called it, being a calculator, using data. And it sounds like that's where in the predictive AI space. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Right. So an entirely different family of models, the kinds of models that we all are working on at Varicent. But quite frankly, other organizations for other business processes are working as well, is to be able to predict outcomes. Of course, the leaders in the sales space are very interested to understand the potential of accounts, the potential of sales territories. how that translates into predicting quotas set for sellers. So to be able to get much greater accuracy around the potential for sales improvement and sales productivity, and to help with the management of the selling process. Sales managers oftentimes are uncertain as to whether or not a seller is or is not performing up to what should be the potential. And to the extent that we can produce better predictions, it not only helps the seller achieve his or her sales goals because the goals are well aligned with what clients are interested in doing, but sales managers also know what the potential is for sellers and their roles, given their territory and the structure of their territory. Now, there are other applications which we can talk about: predicting seller churn, how accounts are segmented. But that at least is, I guess, a first illustration or first example of where we see predictive AI being extremely useful in the sales performance management space.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the difference, if I'm capturing this properly, is it's a little bit different from the generative AI, the large language models. It's not an open source where everyone has to put data in. This is the type of AI that we can use today to answer questions like you talked about, but we don't have some of those privacy risks or some of the concerns that you guys have mentioned that Gen AI might have. Is that right?
Absolutely. The models, the predictive AI models that we're building and others are building are well protected behind the firewalls that we've put in place and maintaining confidentiality on a client-by-client basis, because these are the golden jewels of corporate organizations, and certainly don't want to see that those exposed in any way. So that's certainly one of the differences across these different types of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I think, the takeaway from all this, if I think about what we've talked about, so different types of AI, as Joel, you pointed out, there's different types of challenges, and knowing which type of AI can solve what type of challenge is incredibly important. I think we've done a good job of talking about that today. And I think the other thing that I took away from this is that these challenges, when we talk about some of the predictive AI capabilities, is some of the viewers today, sales operations, sales compensation professionals, they deal with this on a regular basis. But these problems can be solved today with some of the capabilities that exist. So here at Varicent, our mission is to help organizations develop sustainable revenue growth. And we have the solutions to help companies of all sizes build the right go-to-market strategies. So whether you're optimizing comp plans or optimizing your quotas and territories, we offer these AI capabilities across the platform to help these organizations find that ideal path to revenue. So Martin and Joel, I'd like to thank you both for your time today. Really appreciate the knowledge and the insight and sharing that with the viewers today. And for those of you who want to hear more about how AI can transform your sales performance management processes, please be sure to catch the other videos in the series.